Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 105. Todd Cherches invites us to the zone of the unknown. Here's a shout out to listeners in Arizona, specifically Green Valley, Peoria, Prescott, and Tempe. With that, let's get started. What do you get with a Big Blue Gumball? You get leadership development, coaching, and you get Todd Cherches, who's the CEO and co-founder of the Big Blue Gumball. He authored a really cool book called VisuaLeadership, which is one word, visual ending with a capital L. Todd is also one of the 100 Marshall Goldsmith coaches, MG100. Besides coaching and facilitating, he does something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is teaching students. He's an award-winning adjunct professor at New York University and Columbia University. He's been on probably more than 100 podcasts. If you've listened to all those podcasts, maybe you'll hear something he said before. But what he does share may be unique for this podcast. Oh, and one more thing. You won't hear any Seinfeld or baseball references. Part 1. The Glass Wall. If you listen to enough of these episodes, you'll hear guests talk about the importance of communication, listening, hearing what people say. This applies to one-on-one conversations or talking with groups. What Todd shares is something a little bit different. It has to do with facilitation, training, and interacting with participants. Here's Todd to explain.
Right after 9/11, I wasn't working. New York was in kind of a depression. I needed something just to get out of the house and give myself something to do and to feel like I was growing and doing something productive. So I ended up taking a free Dale Carnegie course. Even though I talk loud and fast because I'm a New Yorker, I'm an extreme bookworm. I always say I'm a 3Bs guy. I'm a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm by nature. So it is not outside of my comfort zone to ever get up in front of an audience or to speak publicly. So I forced myself to take this course, and I almost quit after the first session, actually midway through the first session of 12, because it just wasn't for me. I forced myself to go back in, and not only did I succeed in passing that course, but I became a class coach and was invited to train to be an instructor. And then I ended up becoming a facilitator for their leadership training for managers program. The head of training once sat in on one of my programs to give me feedback. And one of the things he said to me, which is what changed my life forever, he said, it's almost as if there's a glass partition between you and the audience. He said, you know your content inside and out, probably better than anyone I've ever seen, but there's this wall there. They might as well just be watching you on video if you're not going to interact with them. What you need to do is break the glass, step out among the participants, interact with them, engage with them. And that has stayed with me ever since. So that mantra of break the glass wall and step out amongst the people has become one of my mantras. So now I teach leadership at NYU and Columbia. I'm a TEDx speaker. I could speak in front of audiences and panels, but I'm always consciously aware of the importance of engaging the audience because, as we were talking earlier, not only could there be a glass partition between you and the audience, but some presenters, it's almost as if there's a mirror and it's all about them. But what we need to realize as leaders and as speakers is it's not about us, it's about our audience and our participants and how what we're talking about will impact and help them.
That goes back to one of the basic principles that I've identified about leadership is connect with others, which is so critical for you to help other people grow and develop mentally and morally.
Exactly. I love the quote from Bill Nye, the Science Guy, who said that everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. And I say that to my students. A lot of my students at NYU are international students, many from China. And sometimes I'll have a student, like a 25-year-old female from China, saying, I haven't worked that long. I haven't lived that long. I don't have anything to share, anything to tell. And I say, I've never been a 20-year-old female from China. You could share anything with me, and it's a learning experience. If we reframe it from I have nothing to share to I have everything to share, and people can learn from me, you know, that just shifts our perspective and reframes it, again, that it's not about us, but it's about for leaders, it's not about yourself as the leader, it's about the people you're leading.
Just this summer, taught a leadership course at University of North Carolina. It was all graduate students. Mm-hmm. I was just amazed at the richness of their lives and how much they've experienced. Everyone had experiences and things to share from their past, whether they were in the military or whether they were directors in organizations and so forth. I think I learned as much from them as they learned from me.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I say in my classes and workshops is the success of our class is 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3. That's our formula for success, which is 1/3 is the content, 1/3 is my facilitation and my instruction, and 1/3 is the contributions of the people in the room. And we should be learning from each other. Like if I didn't leave every session learning something from each one of you, then somehow we've not maximized our experience. So just by sharing that in session 1 of my classes, it lays down a challenge for them and holds everyone accountable, and it empowers them to say, hey, I have something to share. I have something you could learn from. I do a lot of work around leadership storytelling, but this is leadership story listening. Do we create a psychologically safe climate, culture, and environment where people feel welcome and comfortable in a spirit of inclusivity to share their story? Right. And I think that's a big part of being a leader, is not only to be a good speaker, but to be a good listener and to empower others to tell their stories as well.
Part 2, Capes and Toolbelts. One of the 7 principles of leadership that I talk about is entitled Develop Leadership Practices Continuously. Leadership and learning go together like 2 sides of a coin. You cannot be effective at leadership if you're not learning. To learn, and to really learn, you have to do things you're not used to doing. In this story, Todd illustrates what that means. As you hear, it involves more than having a cape and a tool belt. It requires you to do something that you may not be comfortable doing. Here's Todd with the story.
I talk about this in my TED Talk, how as a kid, people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at age 5, my answer to that question was, I want to be Superman. And then people would say, well, if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan? What else might you be when you grow up? And I said, all right, then Batman. So as a kid, those were my 2 frames of reference of possible career opportunities. But then as I grew older and matured a little bit, I realized that we all have our superpowers. And one of the things I say is, in some ways, I am Superman. I don't have X-ray vision, but I have visual thinking as my superpower, and which is my area of focus. And then as a Batman, I have my utility belt of all my coaching tools, tips, and techniques. So in some ways, I try to rescue people and make the world a better place through the superpowers that I possess as an executive coach. Anyway, with my dream of working in television, which came out of my realization that I couldn't be a Batman or Superman, I got my master's degree in communication from the State University of New York at Albany, and I worked for a year in advertising at Ogilvy and Mather, and then I took vacation to go to visit my college roommate in LA, and I saw that Hollywood sign, and I said, this is where I belong. This is where TV happens. So even though, as I mentioned earlier, I'm an extreme introvert and I try to stay within my comfort zone, I was unhappy with my job, and I decided to pack my bag and my cape and flew out to Hollywood, try to pursue a career in television. But before I got there, there was a story that happened on the plane that is one of my defining moments that I want to share with you. So basically, my parents dropped me off at the airport at JFK. I get on the plane. I'm trying to walk towards the back to get to the coach section, and there's a gentleman with white hair blocking the aisle. And I said, excuse me. And he stood up and he moved away. It turned out to be Graham Tinker, the CEO of NBC.
Oh, wow.
So here I was. My dream was to work in television, and I'm on the plane for the next 5 or 6 hours with the CEO of NBC. He was also Mary Tyler Moore's husband, for those who may not know. So that whole flight, I'm sitting there saying, should I talk to him or not? Because if I don't, I'm going to regret it and kick myself for the rest of my life. But it's so out of my comfort zone to just walk up to some stranger and say, can I talk to you? The whole flight, I kept going up to that curtain and going back to my seat. I couldn't even focus. I didn't even eat. Finally, about an hour before landing, we were like just about to get to Las Vegas. I got up the courage somehow. I walked up the aisle into first class. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Tinker. And I just started rambling. I was an intern at NBC last summer, which I was, and I'm moving out to LA, and my dream is to work in television. Do you have any advice for me? And then I froze. I'm standing there in the aisle, and he got up from his aisle seat, moved over to the window seat, and said, sure, what's your name? Have a seat. So there I am in first class, 24 years old, sitting there with the CEO of NBC. And he said, you want anything? And he got me a Diet Coke. And I was like, this is surreal and crazy. But he spent the next 10 minutes talking to me. He gave me his business card. He said, I probably won't be able to talk to you, but call my secretary, see if she could set up some meetings for you. Just tell her how we met. And that story confirmed that I was making the right life decision and career decision. And even though I never met him again and it didn't lead directly to jobs, I got a few interviews, which helped get the ball rolling for the rest of my Hollywood career. And I was out in LA for 10 years. And I ended up working for Disney and CBS, never NBC, even though that was my first, my dream. That story is just a great example of servant leadership It's a story of generosity. He could have just said, no, sorry, I'm too busy. And I would have just gone back to my seat with my tail between my legs. The fact that he physically got up and moved over and invited me to sit with him and share his advice and his time with me is something I never forget. So now when students reach out to me, or if anyone ever reaches out to me saying, can I pick your brain? Can I talk to you? I always flash back on Grant Tinker and remember that I want to do for others what he did for me.
That is a brilliant, simple story that we have a lot to unpack. There is so much to what you just said. Let's start by talking about comfort zone. It's very clear that if you stayed within your comfort zone, there would have been no growth or very little growth or just small growth. The fact that you went beyond your comfort, you went to where you were uncomfortable and challenged yourself. And it sounds like this is something you've done even at Dale Carnegie with taking those classes. That's where your real growth and learning comes into play.
Yeah, it does. The growth happens not within our comfort zone, but outside it. And even as hard as it might be, we need to push ourselves into what I call the zone of the unknown.
Yeah.
It's a land of uncertainty and potential failure. Think about the things that you've done where you are today and what are the risks that you took that got you here. And if you didn't do those things, it's kind of like going back to my English literature roots, Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, right? You come to a fork in the road, you pick one path or the other, and whatever path you take is going to lead you. You never go back, right? So wherever that takes you, and sometimes it's a success and sometimes it's a road to failure, but as long as we learn, and I love the Nelson Mandela quote, I never lose, I either win or I learn, that we look at everything as a learning experience, even our failures. Even if we do win, we should learn from it and figure out why we won and how we won. I just frame everything as a learning experience.
I kind of envision a small circle, which represents on the inside your comfort zone, then a larger circle around that, which is your learning zone. And then there's a larger circle around that, which is pushing beyond your learning zone. It's just too much of a reach. It seems that a lot of people think that learning zone is a lot smaller than it really is.
Yeah, I love that. Everything I do is around visual thinking. So I love the fact that you created this visual in our mind's eye without even seeing it with our physical eye, right? So we can all picture those circles. And it's kind of like that saying that if you shoot for the stars, you may only land on Mars, right? But you're off. You're still out of this world. That's a good way to think about it. We have to take those risks and push ourselves if we want to grow.
There's another part of your story, which I think is critical, especially with people just starting in the profession. That is what happened where you talk to someone who is highly successful. It's almost like going to a conference. Say you went to a leadership conference and there's Marshall Goldsmith. Mm-hmm. You can walk up to anyone like that, and all the people that have been successful that I talk with, or most of them, they want to give back. They're thrilled when someone comes to them and asks them, just like you did, about, what advice do you have? What should I be thinking? What should I be doing?
Yeah. What's interesting, you mentioning Marshall Goldsmith, years ago when his book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, first came out, he was doing a feed forward workshop in New York, which I went to with a couple of my colleagues. After the 2-hour workshop, we stayed after, and he ended up talking us just to our small group of 4 people for another 90 minutes. So we had a 2-hour workshop and then 90 minutes of like 4-on-1 conversation and we had to leave. He was like, he would have kept talking for another few hours. And we were like, Marshall, we have to get back to work. I know him personally because I'm part of his coaching circle. And that was the first time I ever met him. Yeah, it's like, take that. Worst thing that someone can happen is someone will say, sorry, I'm too busy, or sorry, I can't right now. And they'll appreciate it anyway. But you never know who might talk to you and where that might lead.
I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. They don't realize that being an entrepreneur is very much doing sales.
Yeah.
This is a lesson I'm still learning. When someone says no or doesn't respond, you don't stop. Mm-hmm. It means not at this time. I had to learn the hard way that sometimes at 3 or 4 times, it becomes the opportunity. We just have to get outside our comfort zone and to really develop.
Yeah, and as an introvert, to sell or to self-promote is very much outside of my, my field of being comfortable. If you say to someone, oh, can I have your autograph, or can you sign my book, or can you, whatever, they may say no, or not now, or not yet. You've connected with that person. They feel honored and appreciate being asked. And again, we're all spread so thin. Again, you never know. In fact, people ask me, how did you get Dan Pink to write the cover blurb, one of the cover blurbs, along with Marshall Goldsmith for my book? He was talking about his book When in New York. So I went to his book signing and book talk, and I waited an extra hour to be the last person online to get him to sign my book. So everyone was gone except for him and like an assistant. And he ended up spending 15 minutes talking to me, and he knew who I was. We took a selfie together with him and his book. And then when my book was ready to come out, I emailed him that picture of us saying it was great meeting you in New York at your book signing. Would you be willing to write a blurb for my book? He said, sure, I'd be happy to. It's like we have to put that little extra effort in and take that risk. And I have many stories of times that things didn't work out. There's probably more failure stories than success stories. They're all stories, and they're all learning experiences and growth experiences.
Part 3, the 3 V's and 4 G's. In my leadership books, I write about faulty leadership assumptions that can get you into a lot of trouble. I also write about principles, practices, specifically looking at behaviors and what you actually do when you're leading. What I don't do is get into values and qualities, things like that. What you're about to hear from Todd is what I call brilliant. His 4 G's and 3 V's, or 3 V's and 4 G's, as you're about to hear. These qualities, or characteristics if you prefer, summarizes the essence of what you need to know about what it takes to lead, and even what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Here's Todd to explain.
I basically break it down into what I call my 4 G's and my 3 V's. Starting with the 3 V's, I always talk about visibility, voice, and value. Visibility is about are you seen and how are you seen? That's your personal brand, and that's who knows you and what you're known for. I always ask people, what do you want to be known as the guru of or the go-to person for? Oh, if you need X, Y, and Z, Gary is the person to see. That's visibility. Yeah. Voice is are you heard and how are you heard? That's about your thought leadership. That's about your ideas. That is about your ability to impact and influence, get your ideas out there into the world. So visibility is about being seen. Voice is about being heard. Value, the 3rd V, is about are you making a contribution? Are you adding value? As a lot of times in my HR master's program, in my course, we talk about how does HR get a seat at the table? To get a seat at the table, you have to be perceived by others as someone who can make a contribution and add value. Otherwise, why invite you? I used the quote from Shirley Chisholm, the New York Congresswoman from the 60s and 70s, who said, if they don't invite you to the table, bring your own folding chair. And I love that visual. If you know the musical Hamilton, you want to be in the room where it happened. So how do you get in the room where it happens? How do you get invited to get a seat at the table? We need to be someone who is seen, who is heard, and who is recognized as someone who can add value and make a contribution. Those are my 3 V's. And then my 4 G's are to be genuine, be generous, be grateful, and be graceful. Just to break that down, be genuine is about being yourself as a leader. It's not about playing the role or the part or acting as if you're the boss or the manager. It's about being your true, authentic self with humility, with empathy and compassion. Be who you are and how you are and reveal of yourself. Be vulnerable. That's how you create psychological safety. That's how you build trust. So being genuine. Yeah. Being generous, just as we talked about before with the glass window versus the mirror, be generous. Break the window down, break the glass partition down. When you meet someone, don't think about how can this person help me, but how can I help this person? Sometimes what goes around comes around and you will benefit and it'll be a win-win. But even if not, if we approach things with an attitude of generosity, it's just who we are. It's more human and more humane from a leadership point of view. And it's being generous. Being grateful is about going through life with an attitude of gratitude and appreciating everything, even the small things, and showing appreciation and gratitude to people. And then graceful, my friend John Baldoni, the author, wrote a book called Grace, which is all about, be humble, have humility, admit your failures, don't feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room, all of those kinds of things. If you make a mistake, admit it. That's a Dale Carnegie 101 principle, right? If you make a mistake, admit it quickly and emphatically. It makes you authentic, makes you vulnerable, but also builds trust, and people only will want to follow people that they trust. There's a book called Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? And a classic Harvard article. I always say that people need to be managed by you if you're their boss. They only have to be followed by you if they choose to follow you. So why should anyone choose to follow you? And that's, to me, what leadership is all about.
With graceful that you're just described, going back to your previous point, when you talk about vulnerability and trust, it really sets you up for building psychological safety.
Yes.
If you want to build it with a group of people, you really need to be the person who starts it, who's willing to take that risk, who's willing to step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. One of the exercises I do with classes and workshops and even with my coaching clients is not only sharing success stories, but failure stories.
Yes.
What did we learn from them? You could sit a new employee down and say, let me tell you what to do and what not to do. Which is more powerful, that or telling your employee, let me tell you about when I had your job, let me tell you about the worst mistake I made.
Yeah.
You won't believe what happened. What does that do? It bonds you. It brings you down off that pedestal. It makes you human. It shows empathy and allows the other person to feel psychologically safe to try and maybe to fail. But if you walk around acting as if you're perfect and you're up on a pedestal, that's not leadership. That is basically, management by tyranny, or it's playing a role. That's not being genuine and being, authentic. Acting with grace is to thank people, to acknowledge mistakes, and just to be human, basically.
It reminds me of my coach, Ronald Graves. He actually broke role and gave me some advice. And he said, Gary, if you're going to write about blogs, write about not your successes, but all the mistakes you made and what you learned from it. Just what you were just saying.
Yeah. People's favorite stories from my book and my students' favorite stories are the times where I made mistakes, where I was fired or laid off. It's like, again, it's as a professor, our students put us up on a pedestal. When I tell my students the story about the time I was working for a TV network and my boss threw a box of pens at my head because they were the wrong ones. She wanted the fine point. These were the paper medium point.
Wow.
When I'm talking about giving feedback, I'm like, let's see, if you're the manager, is there any other way of giving your your assistant the feedback that they may have ordered the wrong pens? Nope. Throwing it at their head. That's it. That's the only solution I could see. So at the time, it was humiliating and embarrassing and horrifying and traumatizing. I'm still talking about it 30 years later. And now I can look back with humor and it's a funny story because it's so crazy. But at the time, it was far from funny.
Yeah.
This happened in front of my peers. When I share that story with my students, they can just picture that and they're horrified. One of the metaphors I use is, what is your leadership weather report? So are you a cloud of doom and gloom, or are you a ray of sunshine who lights up a room? So just that little rhyme and that visual metaphor. We all know the bosses, they walk in and it's like hell freezes over and everyone like cowers down and they hope they leave. And other bosses, they walk in the room and it's like the party starts, they're energized. So think about yourself as the weather. What climate are you creating amongst the people around you?
My thanks to Todd Cherches. If you'd like to learn more about Todd, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelledarship.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Finally, I like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.